Should smacking be banned across the UK? Get your calls in for this one now. A new set of proposed child safety laws being unveiled in Parliament today are expected to disappoint campaigners by failing to include a total ban on smacking. Now, smacking is already illegal in Scotland and Wales, but in England and Northern Ireland, a parent can still hit a child if it's deemed reasonable punishment. Where do you stand on this, Mike?
Well, I don't want an overall ban on smacking for a number of reasons. Firstly, I don't want the state to intervene in relationships between parents and their children. Secondly...
Ever?
No, never. No, I don't. There are some very extreme cases, and I think one of them is going to be concluded today at the Old Bailey,
yes.
OK? So we know about that, but that's an exceptional circumstance, and we have a massive social services network in this country which stops that sort of thing happening. But, of course, there are times when it just doesn't work and things fall
but social
through the cracks.
services is the state getting involved. So you either think the social services should get involved or shouldn't get involved.
No, I don't. What I'm saying is there's a social services framework which is there in case anything goes wrong. But generally speaking, the state should not get involved in the relationship between parents and their children behind closed doors. Now, the other thing I'm worried about is it might criminalise parents, OK? Because if, for instance, a parent's in the back garden and... By the way, smacking needs a definition. To me, there is tapping, there is patting. You can pat a child on the back, don't be silly or behave yourself. That's not smacking. So I need to know what the definition of smacking is.
But isn't that very much the problem? There's too much of a grey area here. Your smacking will be different to JJ's smacking will be different to my smacking.
Maybe, but what I'm saying is if it's only a pat or a tap and a neighbour sees across the fence and reports you to the authorities, then we're going to be like East Germany. We're going to be like the Stasi. So I don't want that. And what I think we need to establish is a level at which parents have the responsibility and should be given the responsibility to bring their children up without interference.
Do you think smacking's necessary, JJ, as a parent?
I think sometimes it's necessary. Smacking your kid when you're angry, it shouldn't happen. But most of us in this country were smacked by our parents. Certainly our parents' generations were smacked, and they didn't turn out to be unstable adults. All this tosh you hear from child psychologists saying, child development will be completely derailed if you smack your child. I don't believe it. There are laws in place already to protect children. You're not allowed to throw your child into the wall and break your child's arm. Some deranged, terrible human beings do that to their kids already. This is not going to stop those bad parents from being bad parents. But smacking your child on the wrist and saying, stop, that's enough.
What do you think a smack will do that explaining to a child won't?
It will draw the attention. That's it. Because for a child, if we're talking about a kid who's under 5 years old, their attention and how they can assess information is completely different if they're not focused on something. If you're crossing the road and you say to them, make sure you look both ways, and they continue don't look both ways, it's a smack on them, brings them back into the room, so to speak.
How are you putting together, because I have a 2-year-old and he has a propensity to smack me on occasion, as often toddlers do. And I tell him, we don't hit, do not hit. You don't hit mummy, you don't hit daddy, you don't hit anybody. How are you pairing that up with, but mummy can hit you? Because
it's the context of the situation. That's how
he's trying to draw attention to you, isn't he? He's not trying to punish you or anything like that.
But my son will think that he is trying to draw my attention as well. He's trying to get my attention. Or I've done something he doesn't like and he wants to tell me, I don't like that. So how are you balancing that up? Well, how can you say it's OK for mummy to do it, but not OK for the child?
Because, again, I think a child doesn't like to fall out of favour with his parents. Mummy and daddy don't like me because they just tap me or slap me or something like that. And they don't want that. They don't want to be out of sorts with their mum and dad. And that's, to me, an indication of you've done wrong.
Yeah.
OK. Let's go to the phones. Joanne from Nottinghamshire, what do you think about a complete ban on smacking?
Yes, I agree with it. And hello, Storm. I hope you're feeling very well. It's nice to talk to you again. Yeah, I've always agreed that smacking should not be allowed. Okay. I did have a little conversation with my son this morning. He called in on his way to work. He's 25 now, and he's just left home. And I had this conversation about the fact that I'd never smacked him, ever. And he said, well, I think people a little bit older than me were kind of the last generation to get smacked. He says, but now it's going out as a young person. He says there are sort of young children quite young, it means like 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds being very disrespectful to people. He says, and I'd want to give them a kick round the ear hole. I says, no, you can't. I says, that's just not acceptable. Hitting is not acceptable to anybody. Doesn't matter. I says, but I never hit you because I'm quite laid back and I do like to explain things. But if I shouted at them, they knew that I meant it. So if I raised my voice and shouted properly, that was enough.
I hear you're making a distinction between shouting and smacking. I do wonder whether a psychologist would make a distinction between shouting and smacking, and whether actually both of them show a potential for a lack of control on the parent's side. And it's that lack of control that we worry about. Why did you have to shout?
Well, it wasn't a lack of control. Like I say, normally I would be approached like you. You explain. You say, no, we don't do that. We do. You don't run across the road. You look both ways. But if I raised my voice, then if you like, they knew I would say. If I said, right, stop that right now. Obviously, slightly louder than that.
Thanks for saving our ears.
That would be it. My word was enough. And I got told many, many times how well-behaved my children were, and I think that was good parenting. But I did also once tell a parent off in a shop for smacking her child because it upset me so much. She was smacking the legs of her child because it was in a queue in a shop and it was bored stiff sitting in a trolley. So it was kind of kicking its legs and she kept smacking this child. And I said, look, if you don't stop in a minute, I'm going to call social services because you're hitting that child quite a lot. And it really upset me.
Well, I suppose, Joanne...
don't let them get into that situation where they're so...
Hold on, I would just
not behaving well enough.
Okay, Joanne, I just want my panellists to come in on that because I see both of you shaking your head. Do you think it was out of order of Joanne to step in there?
I think this is the problem that we're going to have if the government put this legislation forward.
Criminalise parents.
Yeah, like Joanne saying that the woman smacking her child's leg. Was she doing this? Was she tapping it, or was she fully belting?
Well, it was enough. It was enough to distress Joanne. And also it was repetitive. So it wasn't a one-off smack; it was a repetitive smack.
But you don't issue your instructions to another parent publicly. Go up and say, "Excuse me, I know your child's been naughty, but I think it's quite distressing." Yes, you can have a quiet
even
word.
If you think that child is in danger. Is in physical danger,
yes.
You wouldn't go in and say, right, that's enough of that?
Well, we haven't had the definition yet of how hard the smacking was, but what I'm saying is this is what I worry about, criminalising parents when somebody else decides to take charge. That's not right.
Joanne, do you appreciate that? Actually, we could get in a situation where you've got parents who are being prosecuted, maybe even jail time, for smacking their child, maybe in a really low moment, Joanne, where perhaps they did lose control, but actually the rest of the time they are really good, supportive parents.
I don't think it works like that. I don't think you should ever be at a low moment where you smack your child. And as regards this lady, it wasn't a tap on the leg. The leg was getting red. The child was screaming in pain every time it got smacked. It was a hard smack. And it wasn't the child's fault. The child was just stuck in a shop queue, bored stiff. And just because whatever this lady wanted, it wasn't a children's shop, it was an adult shop.
Yeah, but
she was
Joanne,
making this child sit there for hours on end or however long it was taking.
Joanne, that's your anecdotal evidence. I can tell you 1,000 parents, 1,000 people who have seen kids who are misbehaving get smacked by their parents and the bad behaviour stops instantly. So it kind of works both ways. I'm not against smacking a child in the right way. I'm not saying we should be hospitalising children, but if a child's misbehaving and the last resort is a smack on the bottom, smack on the wrist, a lot of children will then stop that bad behaviour.
Yeah, just in this example, it clearly wasn't working anyway. Joanne, thank you very much for your call. I do want to bring in a parenting expert now. This is Kirsty Ketley. Kirsty, thank you very much for joining us. Where do you stand when it comes to smacking? Do you think there are certain situations where smacking is necessary just to grab that child's attention?
No, I don't think it's acceptable in any way, shape or form. I've looked after children for nearly 30 years now. I've looked after other people's children and I've never been allowed to smack them, never have I. And so having my own children, it's never been something that's crossed my mind to do because I found other ways to manage their behaviour without smacking them. I just don't see it as a viable option. You know, you talked about crossing the road. There are ways of getting your kids to cross the road. If you're allowing a young child to cross the road on their own when they're not holding a parent's hand, for instance, then they're, you know, you're putting them in danger, aren't you? So you wouldn't allow your child to go and cross the road until they're old enough and, you know, to safely cross the road by themselves. So, you know, I don't think it's ever acceptable, no. And it's not something that I've done to my own children or any children in my career, which started back in the late 90s when it was more acceptable to smack your child.
Would you support a complete ban on smacking in England and Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I would. I think a lot of thought needs to really go into it, though, to police that so that people aren't getting prosecuted, because there's going to be different levels of smacking kids, as you've just been discussing. And I think, you know, some parents maybe would just benefit from, you know, being educated more in their parenting, maybe going on like parenting courses, which happens a fair bit these days anyhow. Rather than you know, getting a prison sentence for a tap on the hand as opposed to anything more. But quite often, if you see parents out and about and they are, you know, causing their child great distress in public, it's not nice. It's not nice to witness. Would you intervene? It's hard, isn't it, to know whether to intervene in something like that. But if I saw a child physically upset, I think I wouldn't be able to just stand back and let that happen. But maybe that's just me.
Also, Joanne brought an interesting point. She said she used shouting instead of smacking. Now, I wonder how you feel about that, because some people will consider shouting can be as abusive if it is used in excess.
Dramatic.
I think, you know, yeah, you've lost control. It's the same with smacking, shouting. You're losing control. When you're getting to that point where you need to shout or yell, then, you know, you've lost control. And in most moments when those behaviours are happening, you know, kids do push the buttons. I'm a parent myself. I understand the frustration of being a parent. It's really hard. But, you know, your children feel safe and secure when there's control. And when they've lost control, they need you to be in control. And if you're yelling and shouting or hitting or smacking, you've lost control as well. Nobody's in control. They don't feel safe and secure. And that's where those lasting problems can come in. You know, it's not posh to worry about your child's mental health, as mentioned earlier. You know, you don't know what their lasting effects are going to be on children until it's too late, until those effects are seen later on in their, you know, going into adulthood. And those repeated behaviours and patterns as well, you know, it's that cycle. So it's up to us as parents. I think you have to think about the long-term effects of that. But I mean, I don't like anybody shouting at me, whether they're a child or a grown-up. You know, I don't think we all need to be shouting at each other to get our point across, to disagree or anything. So
or
why,
smacking.
you know,
I wouldn't like somebody to come up and smack me either. As an adult, I wouldn't. Never mind shouting. I mean, smacking would be no.
And Storm, you pointed out as well, you know, that you're saying on the one hand to your kids, no, you shouldn't hit, you shouldn't punch, you shouldn't kick, bite. Yet why is then it okay for you to do it? You know, if you want respect from children, you have to show them a level of respect as well.
Okay, personally. We're going to, Kirsty, hold that thought, JJ. Kirsty, stay with us. We're going to go to the calls. I've just realised we've got so many on the line, which I'm excited. I want to hear from you. Linda from Orkney, what's your view when it comes to smacking? Do we need an outright ban?
No, plain and simple. We've got the ban here, and the kids up here nowadays have absolutely no respect for older people. They're wrecking things. They are absolutely running riot. Okay, but are you telling me then, Linda, that physical violence is the only way to instill discipline in children?
Well, is it physical violence?
There's a whole difference between giving them discipline and giving them a kick-in effectively.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, no, I totally agree. What Linda's saying is, where do you draw the line at physical violence? You know, a tap or a pat is not physical violence.
If somebody came up to me, if Ella, bless you, our floor manager, came up to me right now and slapped me out or smacked me, I would say that was physical violence.
Yeah, but if it was a pat, sort of to remind you of something, don't do that again, that's not physical violence.
I'd find that very unusual. Linda, thank you very much for your call. Lizzie from Hampshire, what's your view on this one?
Well, I'm totally and utterly anti-smacking. Okay, I didn't have my daughter until late in my life, but if ever she was naughty or played up, what I used to do is to go down to her level so that my face was near her face and I would just explain to her that what she's done is not acceptable and it's naughty. And I have never raised my hand to her. When she went to a playgroup in Romsey, I was involved with the children there, and I was asked in the end to help out. And I absolutely loved it. And then that led on to me looking after other people's children, and not once did I ever raise my hand to those children.
Lizzie,
I always explained their behaviour was not acceptable.
I've got it. It sounds very much like the gentle parenting that's going around at the moment, which has been criticised, though, for the lack of discipline in young children in our society. What would you say to those people that say children nowadays just have no respect for their elders, and it's because they aren't disciplined enough?
Where does this word discipline start? I mean, there's an awful lot of casual behaviour goes on in schools these days. I mean, some schools, some of the teachers get known by their Christian names, don't they? Yes. It's not sir or miss. And I mean, I've seen children that don't stand up on buses for elderly people. Yeah. I think generally manners seem to be disappearing.
But why? Is it because these children aren't disciplined enough, the parents aren't strict enough?
I don't think walloping a child is acceptable, because at the end of the day, you don't know how hard that wallop's going to be. Secondly, you're taking your anger out on the child because the child is showing you up in public because it's misbehaving.
Okay, I mean, I've actually ran out of time, unfortunately, on this. But Lizzie, I think JJ's going to step in and say nobody's saying that you should wallop a child or should ever do it in anger, or there should be any risk of that child being physically hurt by it. I suppose JJ's defence would be it's just to shock them into listening to you, to pay attention to you, which they might not be at the time. Lizzie, thank you for your call all the same. A huge thank you to Kirsty. I wish I could have come back to you. I can't believe I've run out of time.